Good. Thanks very much for listening to me in an evening, right? What I tried to do during sort of the last few hours before coming here, I've started thinking about, what might potentially be interesting. And you may know that I've graduated from ETH in 1989, right? Really tough years go by. But at the time, I had absolutely zero idea that I would ever start, that I would have ever, even thought about starting a business. So what has happened since then, I think, has contributed to the decision to actually start the business, and maybe I want to go through that. At the time when I did my my undergrad degree, I'm an electronics engineer, so you go to ABB, and then you have a nice, safe job, and do a bit of development, and maybe at some point you become head of R&D or so, if you're really lucky. And I knew from the very beginning that this was nothing for me, so I decided, okay, fine, where do I want to go? And I went into consulting. I went straight away to McKinsey. Some of you may know about McKinsey. And I was a total greenhorn, had absolutely no idea. I mean, what you just showed before, I had no idea, right? I mean, valuations, P&Ls, what have you. So that I learned fairly quickly there, got my MBA here in Switzerland. The MBA I got in Fontainebleau at INSEAD, then came back, became a partner of McKinsey in 1998, and then transferred with McKinsey to India. Now, some people ask me, why the hell did you transfer to India? And the real reason is that my wife and I had a deal from the very first day of joining McKinsey, which basically was, as soon as McKinsey would interfere with family life too much, she could pull the plug and I would quit. There are these phases in McKinsey just before partnership where it's really, really bad. Then you get crunched and you work these 90-hour weeks and things like that. So at that time in 1998, my wife actually said, that's it, full stop. We already had 3 children, I was never at home, and it was really bad. So I said, okay, I quit. And then I set up a meeting with a headhunter here in Zurich for a Friday of a week in June. And then on Thursday evening, I came home fairly late, 9:00 p.m., and checked my email before going to bed. Obviously we were thinking about what will I do, which company will I join, And then I heard that I had been elected partner when I checked my voicemail, right? So you can't leave when you're just elected partner. But we said, okay, fine, unpaid leave of absence for three months. So recharging the batteries. And the only way you can do this is you have to transfer to a totally different continent, so that you can impossibly have several clients at the same time in both locations, because then you can get lost in one location and reappear 3 months later, in another location. So we literally put the globe on the dinner table, spun it, and then shortlisted Japan, India, and New Zealand as potential destinations. And the reason why I'm bringing up this example is, I think you just have to take risks, okay? And everybody in the office told me, you're crazy, it's the end of your career and what have you. But in the end, what's really the risk, right? All of you in this room have essentially the choice between very good options, okay? Everybody, because you guys have great education. You have great backgrounds, are traveled, have cultural. That makes you a very, very rare commodity in the world economy, and I can tell you that. You are going to be successful whatever you do, right? So taking the plunge is actually something that I would recommend to everyone, because it gives you new options for growth, right? And I think talking about the culture and everything, that's probably the single most important ingredient. So anyway, spun the globe. And evaluated all the options. Finally decided to go to India. In India, totally new culture, totally crazy. I went into weird places in eastern India, into coal mines and steel mines and so on. So again, totally new environment. But at the time, you could feel the buzz. In 1999 in India, that was .com boom. right? Everybody owned it. There were about, out of the 1 billion Indians, about 500 million were talking about .com, right? So it was really hard not to get sort of this bug. But I knew from the very beginning, thinking about true economics and everything, that the .com boom had to crash at some point because the revenue model wasn't there. I mean, Google, the chance of Google really making it was probably 1 in a million. Now, they made it because they were lucky and they found a revenue model that actually worked. But in many cases, most companies you don't hear about anymore, they went bust because they did not have a revenue model. So anyway, so I then came into touch with a couple of guys from General Electric. They had set up a big back office in India for processing. And processing, you know, this outsourcing of business processes to places like India, that just about started at that time, 1999. And I started investigating the revenue model. It's essentially a very simple one. You know, you have few people and they do some work and they're paid by the hour. That's it, nothing more complex. And at the time, McKinsey was also thinking about setting up a back office research center for its consultants. So that happened because the managing director of McKinsey at the time, Roger Gupta, was an Indian, of Indian origin. So he said, why not put up a research center? And then I was the only guy on the block who was interested in BPO, business process outsourcing and research. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. And we started from zero and set this up in September of 1999, and within a year ramped it up to 120 MBAs. These are all dual degree people, engineering backgrounds. Usually they get the bachelor in engineering at the age of 21, and then they have their MBA by the age of 23, and when they start working at the age of 24, they are dual degree holders, right? So that's a bit of the benchmark I think we have to look at here. And so everybody, these 120 people we built up, you know, over the course of about 1 year, 1.5 years. And we opened the services up to the whole McKinsey world, 80 offices. And you can imagine this to be something like, you know, say you want to have, you know, your professor tells you to write the case study and you don't want to do it yourself. So the consultant sends an email to India and says, please help me, right? And then they do it for you, send you back a zip file with the answer, and then you do a bit of finishing touches and you hand it in. I mean, I'm overdoing it a little bit, but it's company profiles, you know, commercial ones. You analyze Google, you look at the valuation, you look at how the share price has changed, when they hired Eric Schmidt and so on, you know, who drove the business rather than the founders and things like that, right? So that was very successful. And then in the year 2000, in June of 2000, I said, well, you know, I've been around with McKinsey for too long anyway. So why not use this back office model of McKinsey and do a vendor version of that, you know, a free market version, because the McKinsey Center only catered to McKinsey. But taking this third party is essentially a very logical step. That's how it sounded at the time and what we felt. I knew that I couldn't do this alone, so I then started looking for a partner. Now, you know, everybody thinks when you hear McKinsey and so on, oh yeah, all these business plans are well thought through and, you know, everything was planned and so on. It's total crap. What happened was one of my children and one of my future partners' children, business partners' children, went to school together, and our respective wives met at the birthday party. So my wife knew about my plans, his wife knew about his plans, and he happened to be the head of IBM research in India at the time, but a director of IBM globally. He was designated head of R&D strategy for IBM Global, right? So the wives actually started comparing notes and said, why don't we bring these guys together? They would like to do the same things. And then they told us back home, and I said, well, I don't want to do anything with the head of R&D. You know, they don't have any business acumen. And he said, well, I don't want to do anything with a consultant. They can never implement anything. So then finally we had, unfortunately, we had very strong wives. And I'm the founder of the Oppressed Husbands Club. So they basically got us together for a dinner. And as it happens to be the case in India, you know, usually you lose power for about 4 hours or so in a row. And at the time, then we had a candlelight dinner, and we gave each other a PowerPoint presentation on our plans. And basically, that evening, literally drew the business plan on a sheet of paper like this. That was the business plan. So all we had at the time was a pure hunch that it might work. We had a few numbers which were hopelessly aggressive, and we saw later on that they were totally unrealistic. And we just liked each other, right, from day one. And we decided on that evening to go ahead with it. The only thing we did later on was to say, okay, fine, you know, is the guy really who he says he is? Right? Because that's important. You have to trust each other in such a business venture. And if you don't trust each other, don't even start the business. Okay? So that worked well. And then 2 weeks later, I announced at McKinsey, and he announced at IBM. And everybody said, you guys are completely nuts. Right? Because, you know, at McKinsey, you have a decent salary. It's really very decent. And then you go down to zero. Right? Nothing. Zero. Right? And you have a cost structure in place at home, and you have a family, you have kids and everything. And taking that risk, I think, was the second biggest risk I took in my life after getting married. But fortunately, both turned out to be great decisions. And also, there's a lot of impact around the family. Right? And for me, this is just most important. So I would have never taken this step without my wife actually agreeing. And so what we did then is we announced it. It took half a year of planning to get going because of also our notice periods, because having reached a certain seniority level, that means you have to stick around and finish off the processes nicely and so on. And that's maybe another lesson. Never burn the bridges with your previous employer. Right? That's the worst thing you can do, because you might actually either want to come back if you fail, or you know, you want to make sure your reputation is always intact. Right? The reputation, I think, is the most important thing after having made a little bit of money. Right? I mean, it's the people who, you know, people who set up businesses and then waste their reputation by doing something stupid. You know, you rather go bankrupt and you fail in a business rather than to damage your reputation. That's another important element. So anyway, we started in the year December of 2000 from scratch, right? Because what I tried to do was I actually went to McKinsey and said, hey, can I buy out the center, right? Because that would have given us a nice start. But unfortunately, they didn't want to do so. And then we said, okay, fine, let's do it from scratch. So we had no clients, no office, no employees, no infrastructure anymore, just a little bit of our own money. So both my partner and I invested $500,000 into this venture, which was basically, you know, about 80% of whatever we had saved until then. In hindsight, I have to say, it wasn't crazy, but anyway, it worked out. And then we started, you know, renting some office space. And in India, you get the office space without ceiling and without flooring. It's just raw. And interestingly, the landlord had left exactly one toilet seat in the middle of the office. And contractually, we had to agree not to remove the toilet seat. These are the kinds of tactical issues you're getting into when you start the business, right? I mean, some real complete crap. And we actually then guaranteed the landlord that we would put the toilet back in place when we left the premises. Finally, when we actually did leave, he didn't want it anymore because we really built a very nice office. But just for fun, we nevertheless put it in the middle of the office and we handed it over. So it was pretty cool. But the point is, in December of 2000, we started from scratch, and then we started realizing what it means to set up a business, because there are no customers, and there's nobody waiting for you to actually give you the service or for you to sell, right? They're not sitting there trying to take away or to buy your products right away. So there's a lot and lots of marketing that went into it. So we realized that we couldn't do this from India. So I went back to Europe. He went back to the US, actually to New York, and I went back into the Austrian Alps. Now, why the hell the Austrian Alps? Because my in-laws lived there, and we literally worked from a single. We lived in the parents in my in-laws' house, small office. 56 kilobit per second dial-up line at the time, and that was it. And I think that's the second lesson. When you start a business, keep your cost structure low, right? I mean, burn rates are the burn rate. Have you already discussed the concept of the burn rate?
Later.
Okay.
It's only the second week of the class.
Okay. So burn rate is essentially the money you're losing during the first few months and years before you turn profitable, right? That means, you see the million that we have put in, we sort of saw it draining away, right? Because we had to hire people, and these people cost, and you don't get any money initially. So we trained people, and then the first client we actually had in June of 2001. And that was a personal relationship that made it happen. Had we not found that particular client, we would have gone bust. And here, that's another one, networks, okay? Networks are important. I'm not talking about any kind of vicious networks or so. I'm just talking about knowing people, because when you know people, you will get options which otherwise you wouldn't have. And that was a friend of mine who happened to be the CFO of Winterthur Life Insurance at the time, and they needed a competitive intelligence portal. Okay, so we helped them with competitive intelligence, and I had a couple of guys and doing this in India, in Delhi, and that worked well, so we got some money into the system. And then in 2001, I mean, do you actually still remember what happened in 2001, right? Crash, right? Everything crashed, 9/11, everything. So we said, okay, basically that's it, right? And Christmas of 2001 was really bad for us. So we would have almost gone out of business. And I think that's another lesson. It requires stamina. And basically saying, look, we're going to make this work, right? Whatever it takes, we're going to make this work. And that, I think, is a critical element, because you will see that things don't work out as you thought they would, right? It just doesn't happen in this way, regardless of what company you're setting up. So but then in February of 2002, it actually became profitable, the company became profitable. And then next issue was growth. So what do you think? What's the biggest issue about growth? Any idea?
Maybe the balance between what you expect in the pipeline and how much resources you will have to.
Correct. I mean, you have this, exactly. When you get a big project, suddenly you're there, and then you have too few people, and you need to hire, then you hire too many, then you have not enough work, and utilization goes down. That's definitely one thing. When you have a small business, such one-off things, which in proportion are big compared to the rest of your business, then it can almost blow you up. Second, what do you think?
That the system works.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, you obviously have to train people, and you have to program workflow, tools, scalability. That's what we...
When it's small, you are on your own, and you can handle by yourself, and you have so many things.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah, the funding.
Fund, exactly. What do you think is the major issue? Why in a services business like ours, it's just research, it's just people with a few laptops. What do you think is the major capital requirement of such a company? I'm not talking about Google's putting server farms somewhere in Oregon.
Salaries.
Sorry?
Salaries.
Yeah, that's cost, right? But I'm talking about capital, right? That's fixed assets, fixed infrastructure. You might think so, but it's not.
I think marketing
That's a cost as well, but yeah, it's an important cost, agreed, yeah.
What about your reputation in the market?
Yes, but I'm more talking about financial.
Yeah, how to get the money.
Yeah, how to get the money in the sense of accounts receivables. You know, does everybody know what accounts receivables are? It's basically you've sent the invoice, but you don't have the money. Yeah. Okay, that's a very simple concept, right? But you know, the bigger the company, the less quickly they pay. General Electric usually just squeezes you to give you 90 days, which basically means if you send them an invoice today, you get the money 90 days later, right? Other companies, the Swiss companies are good. You know, they give it to you in 30 days, and you see anything in between. Also, sometimes your customers go bust. We had a couple of that as well. So basically what I'm trying to say here is financing needs is going to keep you busy for a long, long time, because you need to make sure you have enough cash in the kitty to actually survive all of this stuff, right? So essentially when you plan for double as much money as you think you'll need, and you will definitely need it, right? We had no idea that this accounts receivable problem was actually going to hit us in this way. Fortunately, and that's the next thing, I happen to know a Swiss billionaire with a little bit too much pocket money. So we ended up in a dream situation where we got some money in little pieces. You know, whenever I needed a bit of money, I could call the guy. We had a sort of an umbrella contract, and I could call off money, say $100,000 or so, $100,000. So I called him up, said I need some money, and then we signed an addendum to the contract, attached it, and that was it, right? So we did 5 rounds, consecutive rounds of funding. And believe it or not, but that is the reason why my partner and I still own 84% of the company. If you go to a private equity firm, you know, these are the professional guys, they'll swallow your business sort of already, like from the very first day, they'll take away 50% of your business, right? I mean, you must know that very well. You see lots of these businesses. So, so that's another, access to capital, right? Critically important. Now again, network, right? Happens to be the case that this was an ex-McKinsey, and you know, I knew him, so we trusted each other. We didn't even need much of a contract, and it's still the case, right? He didn't want to have any board seat. He didn't want to have any preferred shares. Preferred shares are shares that have a higher sort of status than normal shares. And these days, when I tell private equity firms who want to invest what kind of a dream situation we have, you know, they say, oh God, okay, forget it. We're not going to talk to you anymore, right? So funding in a business is almost more important than the business itself, right? Having enough. I just met, I was invited to a conference in Korea, and I met the guy who, the Chinese guy who's founded the equivalent of YouTube in China. And his company had capital injections already of $85 million US, and he hasn't made any profit at all. And guess how valuable the company is? Any? They have about, I think, 10 million users. Just throw up some numbers.
500 million. 500 million.
Yeah, pretty good. 700 million, right? So no money made, $85 million invested, and valuation is $700 million US, right? So you can see how different certain companies are, but I mean, in his case, if he runs out of money, next day he's finished. In our case, we're profitable. We have a services business with about 17% profitability. which means we can grow from our own cash flows. And that's a fundamentally different element. So this whole financing question, right, is very, very important. And I think getting professional help here is really important. Then it started taking off, and right now we have 2,500 people. They are located in our operating centers in India, in China, in Shanghai, in Chile. We're actually does you guys know where Valparaiso lies? It's like it's the port of Santiago, the capital of Chile. And it's beautiful. I mean, the office is in the middle of vineyards and overlooks the Pacific Ocean. And we've just set up an office in Romania. So globalization, I think, is also a topic that will hit you much stronger than maybe somebody setting up a company like 20, 30 years ago. If your business plan doesn't contain elements of global business system, you don't even get money anymore. Like my partner is of Indian origin, so he knows half of the .com and private equity community in the Silicon Valley. He now lives in the Silicon Valley. And unless you have an Indian delivery element in your business plan, you don't get funding in California. So it's very important to think about your business globally right away. And that brings you to the next aspect, which basically means you have to have traveled, you have to have understood cultures. Doing business in China is very different from doing business in India, very different from doing business in Chile and around the globe. So I think the expectation that business founders have to live up to these days are significantly higher than what it was maybe 20 years ago. I mean, I'm sure you must see this also in your businesses.
Great. I have two questions.
Sure.
We started talking about culture. An important element is when a company grows beyond a certain size, in disseminating that culture, particularly in a global sense. Can you tell us some examples, positive, negative, and how do you manage that?
Okay. Companies go through phases, as you said, right? Initially, once you're below 100 people, you still know everyone, right? You know each other face to face, and you can still control things. Once it grows beyond 100, that's not possible anymore. So you need to put in new layers of management. So I, as the CEO, need to work through a layer of management in order to reach everyone, right? And that's the first major cultural transition you go through. You don't have the direct contact anymore with people. So how do I, as the CEO of the company, influence every single employee? And by the way, I'm not sure, I mean, fortunately I am in my case, but you're not really sure whether the leaders in between tell you everything, right? You're probably getting sheltered from the analysts. So what I do is I walk the floor, okay? You cannot get disconnected from your main delivery, from clients or from your actual analysts doing the work. So I think that's a big lesson that everybody needs to take along. Then you start expanding globally. And managing a Chinese center versus managing an Indian center is a totally different ballgame. So interestingly, we have an Indian who is now the head of the China office. His name is Sumit Chander, right? And everybody in China calls him Su Chan, right? Because he is now the head of China. But there are lots of cultural elements that you need to take care of when you globalize. Just to give you an idea of how challenges this can be in the daily life, right? Feedback discussions with your people. If in India you give the feedback point blank, okay? You just say, look, you need to improve on this, this, and this, and it doesn't matter whether somebody else is sitting in the room. But if you do that in China, you need to, keeping the face is very, very important. So you cannot do that in front of somebody else, and you need to be much more careful. So if you don't take care of all these cultural elements, you're going to be in a big mess. And I think that's another one. Since most of these businesses are going to be global, I think it is important to travel and to get global exposure early on in your careers. The more you do that, the better you will be able to handle that. Then the third one is, now we've reached 2,500 people, and our business plan is to scale up to 10,000, right? How do you manage that? You have to build scalable systems, right? And scalability means you have to have processes in place that still try to keep the entrepreneurial nature of the company, so you don't want to have 10,000 administrators. On the other hand, the processes need to be efficient. So just to give you a couple of numbers, right now we're doing about 350,000 hours of research every month. Last year we have interviewed 64,000 people to hire the 1,000 we actually hired last year. And still, up till this point in time, I still see every single quality feedback across the whole company that isn't good, because a client said it wasn't good, right? So I see this, everything comes to me, and that puts a lot of pressure on the organization, right? Then sales and marketing. I think that is probably the most significant element of operations and scalability. If you don't put your sales force in place, and we have now 55 salespeople in US, in Canada, in all major countries in Europe, in Asia. If you don't put that in place, you're not going to scale up, because your business needs to grow and you need to touch clients, right? And because of that, you can't afford just to leave it to yourself to do selling. I mean, I still spend 70% of my time selling, and I can show every single sales guy how to sell. But if you don't watch out for it, and this is expensive, right? I mean, Salesforce is very expensive. I mean, that was, I think, to your point. It is, in a way, also an investment, and neglecting this would be dangerous. So after a while, you have to start thinking in systems, in resources you put here or there, and that makes culture more difficult. And now we've hired the CFO of Napster. Does everybody know who Napster is? So the guy definitely knows what it means to be in a difficult market environment. And Nand Gangwani is his name. He's now preparing us for IPO. Now, due to current market conditions, this is not going to happen, obviously, in the near future. But we are now putting in place all the procedures. And then being a listed company is a totally different ballgame again. That's a completely different culture. You have the pressure from the financial markets, and so on. You know, the culture will change, and you have to be ready for that. Right? And I think the stress between being a person-based company where you want people to be comfortable and have development, good development, personal development, career tracks, and then having the pressure on the other side from financial markets and so on. That is what is very hard to live through. So was a little bit a long-winded. Maybe one thing which is also interesting. Once you grow bigger, you want to acquire companies. Now, in services, in my business, acquiring services companies is very difficult. What do you think? What's the major issue in acquiring services companies?
Because you mostly buy people, and they want to decide themselves sometimes.
Exactly, and they can evaporate very quickly, right? Poof, and they're gone, right? Whereas if you have a hard asset, you'll probably know the company Cisco Systems, right? Cisco could integrate about 30 companies per every 2 years, right? All they did was they had an M&A factory. M&A means mergers and acquisitions, right? They had a factory acquiring companies and integrating them. Why? There were patents, machines, things you could actually take and integrate. In our case, acquiring a service company is totally different because you acquire people. And worst of all, the founders. What do you think the founders do? What's the big issue?
They don't want to be employees.
Yeah, but once you acquire the company, what do you think will happen.
Depends if they leave immediately. If they don't, usually, I know it from strategic outsourcing, there is some problem that the management does not really support the organizational change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is they probably want to buy a house somewhere in the Côte d'Azur and enjoy life, right? Because they want to cash out. It's very simple. You know, if somebody buys my company and we've got some offers for that, then I say, okay, I'm going to stick around for 2 years, and afterwards I'm going to buy a nice little house somewhere and enjoy life. And that's the risk. So,
Some guarantees which are like issues which are
yes.
For example, if they default on some services,
Correct.
then the client might ask some guarantee.
Yeah, you lock them in. I mean, what you do is when you acquire a company, then you lock in management for 2 years. And you structure a deal where you give them some cash up front, and you give them the majority of the value either in stocks of the acquiring company, or in a so-called earn-out, which means depending on how well they do, they get more or less money going forward. But even then, at some point, they'll leave. So that's one element. The second element, and that's almost more important, is culture. It's very, very hard to acquire services companies, and because the cultures are different, and you can barely integrate them. And I think that's a very, very tricky thing. So we have not been able to acquire a company so far, just for cultural reasons, company culture. Like, for example, ethics. You know, in our case, ethics, our system is built on ethics. So we fire people who, for example, forge an expense bill. We fire on the spot, no questions asked. People who, you know, violate a non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality, we fire on the spot. And that is a standard. And if you don't have that standard, you're never going to integrate the company not having the standard. And these are the kinds of things one needs to watch out for. So that was the first question. And then the second question.
Oh, yeah, that's one question.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
Yeah.
So you said you and your partner put in $1 million of your personal wealth, and at some point your business probably needed more financing. How did you manage the risk, your personal liability risk, when you start taking on debt?
Okay, you mean personal liability by me picking up money?
Maybe you got a bank loan, or I don't know.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, we never took a bank loan. That's probably the last thing I would do. Because a bank loan, I mean, as you can currently see with what's happening in the industry, loans are bad. Right? It's just a very simple rule, loans are bad. Now, okay, there are exceptions, but fundamentally loans are bad. So you pick up equity. Now, equity is essentially you sell some of the shares of your company. So whoever picks up these shares also knows about the risks of failure. And this is why there are private equity firms. They give money to buy shares, and basically their competence is to assess whether a company will survive or not. And even then they take risks. So in that sense, the personal liabilities are not that big because, I mean, okay, fine, if you go bust, these other guys lose their money, but I mean, it's not a legal liability, unless obviously you ran away with the cash they gave you, right? Which is bad anyway. But fundamentally, by working through equity or shares, you don't have that problem. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, how did you find those people that would believe in your business?
Yeah, personal relationship. I mean, the guy is, I mean, I can disclose it because it's public information. You know, the guys who owned Unaxis, Grazia and Anda, the Anda family here in Switzerland. And I knew him from McKinsey, and you know, we sort of trust each other, and that's it. You don't need a contract for that, right? You just need to trust each other. And I tell these guys every single piece of problem that is going on at EvalueServe, right? They know exactly when, you know, when we lost a client because of some stupid error. They know exactly when our accounts receivables are too high. I tell them everything. So they know, and I try to surprise them in a positive way. So I tell them, it actually looks bad, right? But then I surprise them by being a little better than that. And that creates trust. So by doing that, I never had a problem going back to them and asking for more money. But the total invested capital has ever gone into EvalueServe has been $4 million. It's not more. And now we're doing about $80 million of revenue per year at about 17% profitability. So he got a good return for his investment. Sorry, that was a question here.
What are the key elements needs to be there before you start your companies? And how do you know that you are ready to create McKinsey and start your own business? How do you know?
Okay, I think this is what is typically people refer to as taking the plunge. It's you know, just imagine you are in a sort of public swimming pool, right? And then you stand on top of this jumping tower, right? And then you hope that there is water down there, but you jump anyway. It's about how you feel when you do that, right? So it's risk taking. You know that you want to do it, and the reason why you know you want to do it is because you would kick yourself for the rest of your life if you didn't do it. Okay? So Alok, my partner, the reason why he actually jumped from IBM was he would have had the possibility to buy 7% of a company called Akamai for $1 million in 1997 or so. Akamai is there's a company that puts mirror servers all around the world and then optimizes internet access, so making it much quicker. 7% for 1 million. In 2000, the company was valued at $29 billion. Okay, so 7% of 29 billion, not too bad. And that's why he's kicking himself every day. He's now okay with EvalueServe, but that's obviously never going to be at the levels that he could have had. So you just want to do it because you know that if you don't do it, you'll feel bad.
Besides, you mentioned that you have the experience and you have some savings or fundings. Also, you have the network. What other elements do you think is very important to start a business?
Well, I think a good idea. And it all starts with it. And it's called the value proposition. Have you guys already started talking?
I'm just telling him about value addition, value to the customer, value proposition.
Yeah. And for me, I have a very simple concept here. It's cost, time, and quality, right? It's this triangle. Unless your business has a 30% improvement on any one of these dimensions, don't even think about starting it, right? I think you can live with maybe 2 out of 3 dimensions, but you can never live with only 10% on each. It doesn't work. Because you have to have, people start switching to your new service, new product, once you offer them a cost advantage of 30% or a speed advantage of 30% or something like that, right? And this is called the value proposition. Unless you have that, you don't start. Now, we had a fairly good hunch. On the cost side, we could bring 50%. Speed these days, we can do 24/5 operations, research around the clock, which basically means we can speed up things by about a factor of 2. And in terms of reach and quality, we're probably okay, right? So, which means on 2 out of 3 dimensions, we have a real big advantage. So that's the first thing you need to have in place. Then the second thing is a team. Doing it alone is a very lonely job. And the best thing to do is not to team up with a partner who is like you. The best thing is to take a complementary person. Like my partner and I are so different. I mean, people don't believe that we still talk to each other. But that's maybe exactly why, okay? So the team is important. And then the rest is logistics, money and so on. But fundamentally, it's about the team and the idea.
And he did not see my lecture notes. That's what I was telling him.
Oh, okay, good.
Exactly. I'm happy that you repeat it.
I didn't want to undermine your authority, right?
No, because this is real life. This is real life.
Yeah.
Last question.
So yeah, I think we had one back there and one here. Can we take two? Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
There are some companies in Switzerland like Swisscom, I don't know, it's exactly the same. They try to control the behavior of the market using, I don't know, some algorithm, stochastic control, something like that. How far these things are realistic?
Sorry, I mean, what are you trying to say? Control the market?
Yeah, like try to find the behavior of the market and then control this.
Oh, okay. You mean through means of data analytics?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
How far this can be realistic? I mean, helpful.
Yeah. Sure. I think you're probably not going to control the customer. However, what you can do is you can find patterns that work. Okay, so we do a lot of analytics. So we have data centers where we get in lots of data, and then we do segmentation analytics, where we try to find customer segments, and then you try to target, or our clients then take the information and try to target products at these segments. So that works actually quite well. But one cannot, you know, it's not like sort of Big Brother is controlling things. It is
It's exactly the same thing. It says financial control, stochastic control, let's say. And they try to control the behavior of a particular company, you know, to have a special expectation on certain.
Yeah, but you know, don't think it's too fancy what people really do in real life. I mean, stochastic financials, that's, I mean, just for practical reasons, it's a nice thing in theory, but I can tell you, you're lucky when your controlling department actually is able to add and subtract numbers in the right way. You wouldn't believe what kind of a mess these databases have. I mean, for example, I've been in a bank when I did some consulting, and they had a payment application where an Italian paid, I think, a huge amount of lira, for the people who still remember what that was, and changed it into pounds, British pounds. And they forgot to change the currency code in between. And in the evening, they were missing 1 billion Swiss francs on their balance sheet. So everybody started running around trying to find the billion. So what I'm trying to say is, first, these guys need to fix the data because it's so bad. And afterwards, you can try to do a little bit of finance on top of it. But don't think in reality this is like really fancy stuff. Yeah. Sorry.
Comment on that. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
If it is complicated, yes, there are businesses where they can work on complicated models, but the really good businesses are very simple.
Correct. Yeah.
I have a more personal question. You said your wife pulled the plug after you worked at McKinsey. How much time do you have for your family now?
Okay, it's a good point. You know, one of the learnings I took away from McKinsey was that my lifestyle was really screwed up, right, in a massive way. Not as bad as maybe in investment banking. So for anyone who goes into for a few who wants to go into investment banking, these guys work between 110 and 120 hours a week. I mean, I didn't know that this was possible, but it is possible, believe me. But anyway, so I said this should not happen to me. So what we did was my partner and I agreed from the very first day that everybody in sales would work from home. So we don't have any office space in the West. We only have our operating centers, and everybody works from home. Now, you could argue, that's difficult and so on. But I see my children for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner when I'm at home, obviously, and I travel about 35% of my time. But when I'm at home, I'm not somewhere in an office. I'm really at home. So sometimes my son drops into conference calls, right? And even the toughest bankers at Wall Street or in London already understand that can happen, right? And, you know, we have a really strange address, right? It's called Margaritenweg 209 in Patagnon, Österreich, right? Now you have a contract where it says Wall Street here, right? And then you have Margaritenweg in Patagnon, you know? And then people sort of start scratching their heads and say, well, you know, what the hell is this? And then you say and you explain, and actually everybody would love to work from home, right? They just don't have the guts to do it. And and so it's great. And what I do is my commute right now is I have 4 children. And right now we have 2 more because of, so we have 4 girls in puberty now and 2 boys of 12 and 7. And since we have so many children in the house, I had to move my office into my bedroom. So my commute is about 2.5 meters now. And that works really well because I can sort of, you know, the time I save by not commuting, I could split in 2. So half of it goes to the family and half of it goes to the company. And my lifestyle is infinitely better than before. It's really much better. So I think you can design your system in a way. And on top of it, it has several advantages. You know, first, costs. We don't have any real estate. Much, much cheaper. You're much, much faster because you can hire people and they can start working, you know. And also, you actually get better people to work with because most of these people, I mean, I understand you guys still want to meet other people and so on, but once you've gone through 10 years of being in business and once you got your children, you start changing your priorities in your life, right? And you want to be with your family, and then you get people who join at the company with much more experience. And they actually take lower salaries as well. So you save on costs initially. But later on, through well-structured commission plans and stock option plans, they make much more money afterwards, right? So I think there are lots of advantages coming from that. And if done well, you can improve your lifestyle while setting up a business. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it works.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
With that, we're going to thank Marc for an excellent talk.